So let's back up, because to really understand what happened to Elisa Lam, you need to understand where she was. Because the Cecil Hotel isn't just any hotel. This place has a history so dark that it almost feels like it was built to be cursed. The Cecil Hotel opened in 1927 in downtown Los Angeles, right in the heart of what would eventually become Skid Row. And from almost the very beginning, things went wrong there. Over the decades, the hotel became notorious for suicides, murders, and mysterious deaths. We're talking dozens of incidents across nearly a century. Serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, lived there in the 1980s while he was actively committing murders across Los Angeles. Jack Unterweger, an Austrian serial killer, stayed there in 1991 while strangling at least 3 women in the city. The hotel became so associated with death that locals started calling it the Hotel Death or Suicide Hotel. So when 21-year-old Elisa Lam, a Canadian college student from Vancouver, checked in on January 26, 2013, she was staying in a place with one of the darkest reputations of any building in America. Now, Elisa was traveling solo, something she'd done before. She was adventurous, curious, deeply creative. She ran a Tumblr blog where she wrote about books, music, and her travels. By all accounts, she was a bright, thoughtful young woman who was excited about her trip up the West Coast. She'd already visited San Diego and was planning to head to Santa Cruz next. She checked in. She started posting to her blog, and then she went silent. When Elisa's family reported her missing, the LAPD got involved. Hotel staff searched the building. They checked her room, the hallways, the stairwells. Nothing. She was just gone. Now, the Cecil Hotel had security cameras throughout the building, and investigators pulled the footage from the elevator, the last place Elisa was captured on camera. What they saw launched 1,000 theories. The footage, which was later released to the public and went absolutely viral, shows Elisa inside the elevator, pressing multiple floor buttons, stepping in and out of the elevator like she's checking to see if someone is in the hallway. She hides in the corner of the elevator. She peers out. Then she steps outside the elevator and starts moving her hands in this strange, fluid, almost hypnotic way. Like she's talking to someone, or something, that isn't there, or at least that we can't see. The elevator doors never close while she's standing outside, which is weird because those doors should close automatically. Eventually, she walks away down the hall. The elevator doors finally close. And that is the last time Elisa Lam was ever seen alive. The internet lost its mind. When the LAPD released that elevator footage asking for the public's help, it didn't just get local attention, it exploded globally. Reddit threads, YouTube breakdowns, true crime blogs, everyone had a theory. Some people pointed out that the elevator doors weren't closing and suggested someone was holding them open from the outside, someone we couldn't see. Others noticed the timestamp on the video appeared to have been edited, which sparked conspiracy theories that something was being hidden. Then things got really strange. Paranormal communities jumped in. People started comparing Elisa's movements in the elevator to scenes from a Japanese horror film called Dark Water, where a young woman drowns in a rooftop water tank. The similarities were genuinely unsettling. The movie features a girl going missing in a hotel, water tanks on the roof, and an eerie, unexplained atmosphere. Some people convinced themselves the universe was somehow mirroring fiction. Then, and this is where it gets really deep, internet researchers discovered that a tuberculosis outbreak had been detected in Skid Row at the same time as Elisa's disappearance. And the test being used to screen for tuberculosis? It was called the Lam-Elisa test, her name, backwards, on a disease test, during an outbreak, at the same time she disappeared. People were convinced this was a sign of something sinister, a government cover-up, a ritual, a conspiracy. The theories spiraled into places that were genuinely difficult to follow. But the real investigation was still ongoing, and the truth was hiding somewhere far less mystical and somehow more heartbreaking. On February 19, 2013, almost 3 weeks after Elisa went missing, guests at the Cecil Hotel started complaining. The water pressure was low. The water coming out of their taps looked dark. It tasted weird. A maintenance worker was sent to check the rooftop water tanks. There were 4 of them, large and industrial, sitting on top of the building. They were supposed to be locked and inaccessible to guests. He opened one of the tanks, and he found Elisa Lamb's body. She had been floating in that tank, the hotel's drinking water supply, for nearly 3 weeks. The guests had been drinking that water, showering in it, brushing their teeth with it. The horror of that realization hit the internet all over again. The tanks were locked. The hatch to get into them was heavy. There was a ladder on the outside of the tank that was difficult to access from the roof. The roof itself was supposedly locked and off-limits to guests. So how did a young woman, with no apparent motive, no signs of foul play, and no witnesses, end up inside a locked water tank on a hotel roof? Detectives genuinely couldn't explain it, and the internet ran with that uncertainty into some very dark places. The coroner's report was released in June 2013. The official cause of death? Accidental drowning. The manner of death? Accident. Toxicology reports showed that Elisa had not taken any illicit substances. But investigators did find that she had a history of bipolar disorder and that she had medications in her system that were slightly below her prescribed therapeutic levels, suggesting she may not have been taking them consistently during her trip. Bipolar disorder, particularly during what's called a manic or mixed episode, can cause disorganized thinking, paranoia, impaired judgment, and behavior that seems deeply irrational or frightening to outside observers. Her movements in the elevator? Consistent with someone experiencing significant psychiatric distress, possibly paranoid, possibly confused, possibly in a state where her perception of reality was severely altered. As for how she got into the tank, investigators believe she accessed the roof through a fire door, which, despite supposedly being alarmed, may not have been properly secured. She climbed the external ladder to the top of the tank, opened the hatch, and either fell in or entered deliberately. The door wasn't locked. The alarm may not have functioned. These were failures of the hotel, a hotel with a long history of neglecting the safety and well-being of its guests. Here's the thing that I keep coming back to. Elisa Lam was a young woman who was traveling alone, living with a mental illness that she managed, until possibly she didn't. She was creative and curious, and she deserved so much more than what happened to her. And instead of being remembered for her writing, her passions, her life, she became a viral mystery. Her last moments, clearly spent in some kind of distress, were watched by millions of strangers who were trying to figure out if she was the victim of a ghost, or a government conspiracy, or a supernatural force. The elevator footage wasn't evidence of something paranormal. It was evidence of a young woman who needed help, and who, in those final hours, didn't get it. The Lam-Elisa tuberculosis test connection? Pure coincidence. The name had been around for decades. It stands for Enzyme-Linked Immunosorbent Assay. The timing was chilling, yes, but coincidences happen, and our brains are built to find patterns, especially when we're scared and looking for meaning. The Cecil Hotel, now rebranded as Stay on Main, tried for years to shake its reputation. A Netflix docuseries called Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel came out in 2021 and reignited global interest in the case all over again. But what the docuseries did really well, and what I think the whole story ultimately forces us to reckon with, is the ethics of internet investigation. Because the internet sleuths who dove into this case, some of them did real harm. A musician named Morbid, who made dark music online, was accused by internet users of being involved in Elisa's death purely because of his aesthetic and the fact that he'd stayed at the Cecil once. He received death threats. He had a breakdown. He was completely innocent. That's the other side of internet obsession with mysteries. We can convince ourselves we're doing justice, but sometimes we're just causing more damage. So where does that leave us? Elisa Lam died accidentally, a tragedy shaped by mental illness, a hotel with dangerously inadequate safety measures, and a series of failures that should never have happened. The mystery was never really supernatural. It was human. Deeply, painfully human. And maybe that's more unsettling than a ghost story, honestly, because it means the real horror was things we could have prevented. A door that should have been locked. Medication management on a solo trip. A hotel that should have cared more about its guests than its cheap operating costs. The Cecil Hotel stands as a monument to what happens when a place stops seeing the people inside it as people. Elisa Lam deserved better. And remembering her story means remembering her, the book lover, the blogger, the traveler, not just the footage. If this kind of deep dive storytelling is what you're into, where we go past the headlines and actually sit with what a story means, then you're going to want to stick around on this channel. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because I've got more cases, more mysteries, and more stories that deserve to be told properly. And if you've got a case you want me to dig into, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. See you in the next one.